Hello everyone. In this tutorial, I will be showing you how to install the Social Interaction Cloud, or SIC. I will first show you how to install it on macOS using Visual Studio Code, and then how to install it on Windows using PyCharm. Since macOS and Linux are fairly similar, for Linux users, we suggest that you follow the macOS tutorial. Do note though that there will be some differences, which I will point out along the way. Let's start with macOS. First of all, there are some preliminary libraries that you need to make sure are installed on your system. To install them, open a new terminal and run the following command. You can also find these commands in the documentation, which should be linked below this video. Note that this is assuming you already have Homebrew installed on your system. Homebrew is a package manager for macOS that is commonly used. If you don't have Homebrew installed, you should be able to easily find tutorials on how to do so online. For Linux systems, these commands are similar but slightly different, but you should be able to find the exact commands you need to run, again in the documentation linked below. Next, we will open up Visual Studio. Then we will click on Clone Git Repository. I'm assuming you have already been provided a link to the GitHub repo that you need to clone, which you will then paste in the pop-up menu that appears. If you don't have a link, you can find a link to the standard SIG applications repo that we use, again in the documentation linked below. It will then ask you to create a folder or select a folder for your workspace. I'm going to go ahead and create one and call it SIR for Socially Intelligent Robotics. It will then ask you if you want to open the repository, and you should click Open. So this repository isn't actually the Social Interaction Cloud. It's a bunch of demos that show you how to use it. To install SIC, we're first going to create a virtual environment. To create a virtual environment, open a terminal by clicking on this icon in the top right corner. You are then going to type in the following command. You will then likely get a pop-up asking you if you want to select the environment for the workspace folder. Here you should click Yes. This will make it so that you don't have to manually activate your virtual environment every time that you open the workspace. If I then open a new terminal by clicking on this plus icon, you can see that the virtual environment is automatically activated. Now it's time to actually install the Social Interaction Cloud. You can do so by running the following command. Make sure you do so in a terminal where your virtual environment is already activated. Now all that's left is to install the Python library for JPEG Turbo. You can do so by running the following command, which you can also find in the documentation linked below. You can now verify that SIC is installed by running the desktop camera demo. However, first of all, you will need to make sure that the Redis server is running. Open a new terminal and run the following command. Now you can simply open the desktop camera script and click the play button in the top right corner. It may take a moment to initialize at first, but after a few moments, you should see your desktop camera appear. To exit your SIC program, click Ctrl-C. On a side note, you should make sure that your Python interpreter is set by clicking down here on the bottom right. You might also need to make sure that the Python extension is installed for VS Code. This should enable you to command-click on the imported objects and be brought to their definitions. This is useful if, for example, you want to see what all the fields are for specific configurations and message types. That concludes the macOS/Linux tutorial. Now I will go over how to install SIC on Windows. First, download PyCharm. We recommend using PyCharm because sometimes Windows has difficulty exiting processes, and PyCharm makes it easier to stop them. Once PyCharm is open, click Clone Repository. Here you will paste the URL of the SIC applications repository which you should have been given. Note that as a preliminary step, you should already have Git installed on your machine. If you don't, there should be plenty of tutorials online showing you how to do so. If you get a pop-up asking you if you trust the project, say yes. It might ask you if you want to create a virtual environment from the setup.py file. Here you should say OK. If you do this correctly, it should already install SIC onto the virtual environment for your project. If not, you will manually have to create a virtual environment by clicking on the interpreter in the bottom right, then on Add a new interpreter, and then Add local interpreter. You will know if the interpreter is set correctly if down in the bottom right you see a version of Python that points to your virtual environment. You should also see your .vend folder highlighted as a library root. If you had to create a new environment from scratch, you will need to open a new terminal and run the following command. Having this set up correctly will enable you to command click on imports to go to their declarations. This is useful if, for example, you want to see what all the fields are for a particular configuration or message type. To start a program, you always need to make sure that Redis is running. Open up a new terminal within PyCharm and run the following commands. You might get a pop-up asking you about enabling Redis to communicate through the firewall, which you should give Redis the permission to do so. You can now verify the installation by running the desktop camera demo. Note that there are additional instructions in the documentation on how to install JPEG Turbo to improve image processing. I don't believe JPEG Turbo is fully necessary, but it is recommended. That concludes the Windows installation.